Hey everybody. So I'm on the stream now, just to let y'all know. Today will be a two rope hands behind test. So everyone here is going to be tying and being checked for the test. If you are at home and watching and tying along, you should tie your two rope go tag and then take a second to assess what it looks like. Write down any things that you need to work on or change, and use this as an opportunity to mark out what you should be practicing on in the future. So we'll give you 15 minutes and we'll be back. All right, everybody. Thank you for your hard work. I want to note a couple things that I think both Melissa and I noticed.
Oh, just in general, when you're checking your own
Yeah.
work for your hands behind or chest harnesses in general, I think would be good to talk about both for y'all and the folks at home.
Yeah, the three things that I saw that came up the most often in the ties that I checked were making sure that after you tie your single column tie, you rotate that knot all the way up until it touches the back.
Not till it's just
Not till it's vertical,
straight
but
up.
all the way till it touches the back.
Like past
If,
that.
if you don't do that, you'll have a tendency for your knot to come open. And your knot to come open as you start to put more tension on that TK will cause the knot to collapse, will cause more length of rope to go into your harness entirely, and it will cause your tensions to change, right? So being very careful with that knot is important. The second thing that I saw pretty frequently was making sure that where your kanuki line are interacting with your bottom wrap, that you're not putting too much tension on it, that everything is laying flat. And then the third thing I saw frequently was not quite complete half moons on the back. So the second friction that you use to lock your bottom wraps really should touch. So when you're intersecting, you have a cross. If you've built it properly, you should have rope touching all four quadrants of that cross and finish by wrapping out under the bottom. A little helpful trick with this pattern that I pointed out talking to June and a few other people is if you're doing all of your frictions properly, so as you start to tie, you choose a direction that you tie it. I'm either tying to the right or I'm tying to the left. As you finish your first friction, your X friction, you should put your X, you do one wrap around the stem, and when you're done, the rope should be coming out from the underneath the stem, moving in the same direction that you started it. So if I started to the right, I'll put my X friction in, put my one wrap under the stem, it'll be coming from under the stem going to the right. As I build my half moon, if I've done my half moon properly, the same thing should be true. I should finish my half moon, the rope should be coming from underneath the stem going in the original direction that I started it. It's a good rule of thumb that can help you make sure that that you've inserted all of the components that are needed to complete each of those frictions. Make sense? Cool.
So other things, just in general, when you are checking your own harnesses, the things that I was looking for specifically, when I use my hands, placing my thumb at the top of the shoulder and I spread my fingers down, am I spreading it roughly the same distance down to touch the top wrap? Then between the two wraps, do I need to use the same number of fingers to get between the top wrap and the bottom wrap? If not, make sure that that's a conscious choice, right? It might be nerve stuff or placement preference of the person you're tying, that's fine, as long as it's consistent, right? Looking at the tie, is it generally horizontal both in the front and the back for your wraps? And your kanuki lines, right? The kanuki lines should be up and close to that bottom wrap. We don't want them ducking down, like kind of looping down, because that means there's slack in your line. And especially once we get to suspension, that line can move and grab the skin and the flesh in there, and that can be really unpleasant for the person in the rope, right? We don't want that shearing to happen, so getting those nice and tight and horizontal is important. Making sure your stem is centered on the person's spine, super important. We're gonna come back to this again and again and again, and especially as we lead up to suspension, having that centered is going to make sure that the person can stay balanced in their suspension. So you are going to hear us tell you this every time, make sure it's centered on their spine. Your frictions should be nice and compact, they should be dense, and no space in the friction against the rope, right? Looking for an X friction at the top, a half moon at the bottom for this particular tie. That is not always going to be the case, but that's what we were looking for today. The knot at the wrist cuff should not have collapsed. That wrist cuff should be even, all your tensions should be even. In general, we're looking for slightly tighter tension in the top wrap than the bottom wrap. And as Andrew mentioned, making sure that your kanuki lines are not bunching up your bottom wrap so that you have cleared everything and everything is laying nice and flat.
Yeah.
It's a lot to keep in mind. And even I forget to check some of these things sometimes, but that's what we're looking for. And for folks at home, that's how you can check your own work.
Yeah. And a quick note, to Melissa's point about why we're so stringent on the stem being at the center of the back, once we start putting people in the air, it is challenging enough to manage your own body weight when you are suspended.
Gravity's a bitch.
It makes it even more challenging if you're not suspended in a balanced way. So the example that I would give is if someone were face down, so imagine this is their head, this is their legs, this is their torso. If the stem isn't down the center of their torso, it tips their body in one direction. What that means is that all of the force of their weight is going to one side of one section of the harness that they're in, which makes it way harder to deal with than if they're perfectly straight and everything's balanced across those things, right? So it's the difference between distributing the force between two different areas and sort of pouring it all into one area. Now, if you're doing a torsion or that's the thing that you're aiming for, like, that's great, but do that on purpose. Don't do that as an accident, right? And understand the choice that you made to do it on purpose as opposed to just doing it because you're not thinking about it or you're careless, right? Make sense? Cool. Let's move on to Futomomo Shibari ties or leg ties.
Bent leg tie.
Bent leg tie. Does anybody have any questions generally about how that pattern works?
Or why it's even a thing.
Or why it's even a thing?
Yeah.
Question?
I don't remember who told me this, but I was trying to figure out, like, how to remember, which direction you wrap it, up or down, and someone said something like, where you don't want the wraps to fall, like, if you're trying to avoid it to fall up, then you, like, now I'm trying to remember, then you go over, like, pull it, or pull it away from there, basically, so it's wrapped.
So,
I don't know, how do you?
when you are wrapping in general, like for your wrist cuff or this tie, the direction you wrap is going to be the opposite of the direction the rope will exit if you're doing the book knot, right? So if I wrap downward, when I tie my friction and construct that knot, I will exit going up. So if I wrap toward the ankle, when I complete the knot, the running ends are gonna be exit toward my knee. Does that make sense?
Is that the question you're asking?
Not quite.
There was
Okay.
a lot of this and that and the other
Yeah.
thing I don't necessarily
I think,
understand.
well, maybe once you go, I just point to it.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, the Kanuki.
Oh, the
It's like
Kanuki.
which direction,
Okay.
Okay.
yeah, the directionality, yeah, I think that's my question.
The directionality of the Kanuki. is the
Ah,
question.
okay. So this is actually the bit that you talked about is the hardest bit to see in the video.
Mhm.
So what will happen is after you create, so you tie your first two lines that are going around the top part of the thigh, the medius part of the thigh. As you come in, you'll do sort of an X friction to isolate the ankle cuff. So what that does is take tension away from the ankle cuff. So when you put tension into the tie, it goes into that bottom wrap. So after you isolate that, you'll have your running ends. You'll pass between the leg where it's cinched together. If you've created that X friction properly, you should be on the bottom of those two wraps, right? The part that's closest to the foot. As you go between the two legs, you go from the bottom to the top. You fold over to the bottom, and you go back to the top on the other side. So you create a figure eight. The reason that you're creating a figure eight and then locking that off is that we are trying to keep the Kanuki line that is in between the legs from traveling to either towards the thigh or towards the ankle. Because if it does that, it will start to shear on either of those bits of flesh. And these are particularly tender bits of flesh. So the idea is we're taking that Kanuki line and we're locking it off at a place where it can't interact with the body for the comfort of the person that's being tied. Is that the question that you're asking?
I think so.
Yeah.
Cool.
I'll try that for another
Yeah. It also, like, because it's a figure eight, it allows for a little bit of play inward and outward, but not very much. So yeah, it's a weird thing that not very many people do, and it's very hard to see in the video.
Yeah. So I would say let's take a pass at y'all tying this once, and then we'll sort of look at what everyone's tied, and we'll give everybody feedback. So. All right, friends. We're mostly back in. People mostly got checked. Everyone mostly did a great job, a surprising job considering how potentially confusing that particular video was. There were a couple of points that came up where I think people were having questions around when the leg is bent, like sort of sticking their fingers through the place where the legs come together. Part of how Melissa and I built this tie, and this is probably the first tie that y'all are tying that has been like specifically engineered by us. The tie was like 5-ish years in the making, because when Melissa and I started tying, and when we got to a place where we started suspending, like being in a Futomomo Shibari like hang, like a one-legged Futomomo was like, that was the fashion. Whatever is fashionable in rope bondage right now in the Instagrams or whatever, a single leg Futomomo was the fashion then. So all of the cool kids were doing it, but I could not tie one really well, and Melissa fucking hated them.
Well,
So
specifically at the time, the style was like just wrap, like a spiral wrap, and like that's just a single line passing. Oh, like that fucking sucks. Like it is not for me. So we workshopped and tried a bunch of different stuff, and eventually came up with this one. Not only because it's something I can be in, but also it's something that Andrew can tie pretty consistently and fast enough and with enough sort of balance to it that I can stand up while he is tying it.
yeah, so we wanted to do a demonstration
But
of.
we should go through the tie.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
sure.
Just as is, because I think that video is confusing a little bit.
So I think the biggest place that people were getting confused is nearly every time you are, and it's not nearly, it's every time you are passing between the legs, whether it be on the kanuki or whether it be to come back and create the stems, you're always passing underneath the structure you've created. You're never passing between the structure and the leg. It should always be underneath, between where the ankle and the biggest part of the thighs, like the largest.
Way down here. You're not like trying to shove your finger up between the calf and the thigh. It's foolish. Like there's just not space there.
If you ever find yourself doing that, you're probably not doing it in the right order, right?
Yeah. Or you're not doing this pattern.
Yeah.
Right? You might be doing someone else's pattern. We have built it so that you don't have to do that.
And we built it that way because, like, I have rather large hands and fingers, and Melissa's very flexible, and me jamming my finger into this with as muscular as Melissa is very unpleasant for me and really unpleasant for her.
Yeah. Hey, I don't really want you poking me.
So going through this big gap where I can see space and see what's on the other side, and I don't even have to put my hand in there, I can just pass the rope from hand to hand and wrap underneath it, makes that part of this tie really, really easy and efficient. Aside from that, I don't know about you, but everybody's was pretty good when I looked at them.
Yeah, there were a few things, like small
Yeah.
refinements, but I think going over the tie for everyone
Yeah.
and the folks at home would be great.
So we're gonna do a demo. Are we good with this camera? Awesome. So we're gonna actually do how I do it when Melissa's standing. So if you could stand there and grab onto that. Scooch a little bit this way, please. So typically when I am tying this and Melissa is standing, Melissa has some sort of chest harness on and is attached to a suspension. So I don't need to worry so much about Melissa's balance, right? The first thing you need to do to tie this on someone standing is you need to sit your ass down, take that person's foot, anchor it on your shoulder. I now have access to all of the portions of the leg that I'm gonna need, right? So I can then, I will typically, before I hook the leg up, I will tie the single column.
And so just a reminder, you can do a single pass on this single column. It doesn't need to be double wrapped.
This goes in, right? I reach my hand up towards the crotch. Once around. Again. Twice around. Melissa likes 3 wraps on the thighs.
I do prefer 3 wraps, and I also prefer, this is again personal preference, I prefer the wraps to be very close to my groin.
Yep.
My thigh is very curved, And if it's not there to start, it's gonna wind up there anyway. So I'd rather have it start there and not shear up my thigh.
I pass over everything and through. I make the X friction to isolate the cuff.
So he's not catching the cuff, he's
Right.
going around the stem.
I go through the biggest part of the leg and we'll turn around. And so I'm coming to here. Once I'm here, I pull the rope through. Right?
So
I
he's
passed.
above, he's toward my knee on that cuff, right? So he came underneath the cuff on the outside. On the inside, he's coming toward my knee, behind and under the cuff, to then wrap over.
And then I go over again through the largest part, so I don't even have to interact with the leg at all. I go over and across. And as I come under, this is the trickiest bit. I've got this kanuki line right here. I'm going to put my finger from above to the opposite side of the kanuki line. And I'm going to make a lock that locks that kanuki in place, that keeps it from traveling. So it stays in the middle of the leg right here. Once I'm done with that, my rope is already exiting to go towards the upper part of the leg. I'm going to move up. Once around, twice around. For Melissa, this is usually where I have to connect.
And if you don't want to have to hold that tension while you get your new rope out, you can tuck it into that rope. Gives you both hands to work with.
Yep.
Woo. Sometimes you drop your tension, that's okay. It's already locked up. Like this cuff, this whole wrap is already locked off. So if you have to readjust that second wrap, that's fine. This would have been a good chance for him to connect later from the other side, so he didn't have to pull that rope through.
Once around, twice around. Through the biggest part of the leg, again, right? I don't have to interact with that stuff.
Don't jam your finger
Coming
through their
here.
thigh.
Once around.
So this is reinforcing that stem, helping to keep that distance between the two wraps.
Through again. And I have a ton of rope left, right?
So much.
So what I can do is,
Come on, we can clear this wrap a little bit.
I can do that. You also can do it.
I
You
did it.
I'm gonna put 2 wraps, and then I can take this third rope and make an extra.
4 pass wrap if you want.
I can do 3.
It's just a lot of
3
rope.
will work.
It's just a lot of
All
rope.
right.
So
And
he's
usually
just,
I'd use 1.5.
Yeah.
I'd use a half rope here.
he's just like repeating the pattern basically. This isn't gonna take any weight. Like even if we were to do suspension, we wouldn't attach that wrap. Pretty bow to finish off. Use up that rope. Nice, quick, efficient way.
Right. And so the advantages of this particular tie, Melissa likes loading to the thighs. So I can attach here. So I can attach around this friction right here. Right?
Catching just this wrap, right? He's not ever gonna catch this ankle cuff.
I'm
That's
just gonna
not what
catch
that's
this wrap.
for.
I can
This
attach.
is just an anchor point to start the tie. Once it's locked off there and isolated, like you can even untie this.
Yeah.
If you wanted to.
If
That's
that person's like, this is on my ankle, it's uncomfortable, I
Right.
can just pull this out and tie
It,
it, right?
like, once this cuff is locked, you don't need this.
I can attach from this point on this side.
So just a quick note about these attachment points. If he attaches here, it's gonna load more to this side. If he attaches there, it's gonna load more to this inner side,
Mhm.
right? You can also attach like from the top of the thigh.
It's gonna put everything into the shins.
So if people are like, ooh, I love shin pain, do this. If they're like, fuck you, I hate that, attach from the shin side, right? It's gonna pull it away from the shin and load everything
Yeah,
into the
I
thigh.
think that people don't often look at, can I help you to light is that you can do,
You can attach at the shin.
like if you wanted to do a Y hanger or an upsilon,
We'll go over these attachment styles when we get to suspension stuff.
you can then pull this to the shin. And
Notice it's pulling away from my shin, right? So that means everything is loading into my thigh, which is awesome.
right? And so all of this is going here and here. So the idea, much like the harnesses that we use, much like the hip harnesses, like I have an affinity for, I'm going to create sort of one solution that I can use in multiple different directions. And that's what this does for us. Make sense? Questions? Cool. We're going to take a quick break.
I have a question.
Question to Matt.
Good to see you. So, from the Futomomos I've learned, sometimes, like, I have learned to really get the heel towards the butt as much as possible.
Uh-huh.
Where I saw you were just placing it there and not, like, really squeezing it.
You
So
shouldn't.
I wanted to
Oh.
ask if that was, if you are doing that because you're locking the stitches down so much?
So the question is, why do we not bring the heel super close to the butt, where other patterns really reinforce that, like, you need to get the heel as close to the thigh or the butt as possible. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yes.
So the answer, in my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong,
Uh-huh.
the answer for that is that that figure 8 kanuki between the cuff on the lower cuff is going to prevent it from moving, and by not having to have the heel super close and not have it allows you to tie it more easily because you have more space
Yep.
to get in and around. It shouldn't be moving once you have that figure 8 kanuki in and you've locked it off correctly. And it's less likely to cut off the circulation to the person's foot or leg by not having to tie it super tight.
Yep.
That was one of the other problems that we encountered with other Futomomo patterns that we tried, was that emphasis on it has to be super tight, the leg has to be super compact, meant that I was losing circulation. And once you lose circulation, it's really hard to tell if you're incurring any nerve damage. So I don't prefer to do ties that are constructed that way.
And it, like, not everybody has the ability to get their ankle that close to their
Yep.
Thigh.
Yep.
And this creates a solution that allows people who maybe don't have that level of flexibility. Like the reason that everyone sort of, or the reason to get the heel as close to the thigh as possible is that if you don't, there's a risk that the leg will compress.
Well, it
And you
will
see
get
how this,
closer.
you see how this tension changes?
Yeah.
Right? The thing that will hold that in place is not just the figure 8 that's underneath, but the way that we construct the stems as they're pulling down is going to hold in tension everything together. So part of your question is correct. Like the way that we create both the kanuki and the stems is meant to reinforce it. Even if the leg flexes, the tension will stay the same. You had a question, Heather. I've got 1, 2, and 3.
That actually answered my question. I was curious
Thank you.
about, like each individual community on each side going under versus like going all the way, like going all the way down one side under and up and down again.
So I did those individually because I had extra rope that I was getting rid of.
No, it was individual for the first two, like
So
sets
the-
as well. But I think it sounds like the reason why is because that makes the structure so you don't have to.
Right.
pull-
Yeah.
So the question, just for the folks at home, was why are the kanuki, or not the kanuki, why are the stems between the top and bottom wraps constructed the way they are? Is that correct?
The original question was why, for the communities on each set of wraps, why are you passing under?
All the way at the bottom.
So I don't know, the original
That's okay.
So, okay, the bottom wrap.
Yeah.
You do the kanuki on one side, under to the other side, and then you go to the next wrap, and then you do the kanuki one side on the bottom to the other side, and then for the third one side on the bottom to the other side, versus, which is what I was usually doing, which was sort of like tying a set, locking it off, tying the other set, locking it off, and then doing the kanukis all in one.
So the question is, why do we do a single wrap, do kanuki from one side to the other side of that particular wrap, then start the second level of wraps and do the same?
For the exact same reason that the captain's asking
Okay.
that question, because we don't want the tension on the thigh to change. You had a question, and then
Yeah, so I was tying somebody recently who had a little bit of like foot drop, a little bit of like neuropathy stuff, like on the
Okay.
top of the foot here.
Okay.
And I tied this tie, and I did let go of the bottom wrap, but we stayed on the ground. If I was looking to suspend, is there additional structure necessary, or is that sufficient to take it into the air?
you didn't.
So the question was, the person was tying someone who had had some nerve issues in their foot. They tied this Futomomo pattern. They're wondering that, and they took off the bottom cuff. So the ankle cuff, that's just to anchor it, not the lower thigh cuff. They released that, and they're wondering, were they to take the pattern into suspension, would they need to do anything additional to sort of protect the person who has nerve issues, or just in general, do you need more structure? The answer is no.
Well, I mean,
Yeah.
bodies are complicated.
Yes.
Without knowing exactly how that particular impingement happened, it's hard to say given the context of this tie. Generally, if you're looking for like, oh, can I unwrap that single column and tie from there? Yeah, if you have tensioned and tied all of the other components properly, then the tie should work the same.
Right. So as we showed, like that third wrap at closer to my knee was just to use up rope. This pattern is structured to only use those two passes. In theory, you could even do just one, like just that lower band, or lower meaning close to the groin and the ankle. The second one is sort of to just help distribute weight, but again, is not required. So
In a lot of ways, like a hands behind tie,
Yeah.
when you're suspending hands behind tie, the thing that's doing the bulk of the work is the first wrap you put in, right? So it's sort of generally the same idea if you want to think of it contextually. This wrap is the top wraps of your hands behind tie. This is the bottom wraps of your hands behind tie. So you're really trying to load in the same way that you would load that thing.
it's gonna add a little more support, a little more sensation of bondage, and potentially help distribute the weight depending on how you tie it and how you load it. But in order to do suspension, you shouldn't need more than those two, and you kind of don't even need two.
Yeah.
Short answer, yeah.
So with the addition of the third wrap, you said you do not want to load from it, but I noticed that you cross-loaded the Y hanger.
Yeah, I cross-loaded the Y. I did the Y hanger that wide just to distribute the weight more. I wouldn't do it. So when I say I wouldn't load from it, I wouldn't attach to here on it.
Like you wouldn't
So
attach
just
at the
one
third.
itself.
Yeah, I would not. I would not
Handle
use
it
that
like
as the
one
primary load point
Okay.
ever.
Yeah, don't load toward the knee in general.
Now,
Seems like a
can
bad
you load
plan.
off your kanukis that are in the center of your first and second and your second and third? So, if I'm suspending straight from here.
Yeah.
Between the wraps, can you load from where you?
Can you load from the stem? Is the
Repeat
thing.
the question.
Yeah,
So the question is, can you load rather than loading from the loading from the line that is closest between the ankle and the thigh? Can you load from the stem that goes between the first wrap and the second wrap? You can. It's reinforced to do that. You're going to distribute more weight between those two wraps, though, right? So the way that I attach to the first line that I put in, primarily puts the weight into that first line, and I do that because that's this person's preference. If the person that you're tying is like, that fucking sucks and I don't like it, you can do it from the stem. Like, that's part of like all of the like workshopping and labbing we went into this thing was like, okay, cool, I want options. A, I want something that's gonna work for this person, but B, if I'm tying other people, I want a solution that gives me options to help work through what feels best for them. Cool.
Any other questions?
All right, it is 11:10. Let's take a 5-minute break. Let's be back at 11:15.
And we'll talk about.
And we'll talk about bamboo.
Bamboo.
While you're on your break, come up here and take a piece of bamboo. You will need one. 80% of the time, it works 100% of the time. Okay, so
Bamboo.
why are we teaching bamboo? Because it's a thing that I feel like everyone should know as far as attaching people to things that aren't people, or maybe to other people. B, this is the first step for y'all learning not by watching a video that I've given you first. This may be a harder type of learning, but what I will tell you is the bulk of the way that people teach and learn in our craft is going to be you going into a room, having to watch someone do something, trying to replicate that thing, getting feedback, and then trying to retain that knowledge once that class is gone. This is the bulk of the way that this thing happens, and it requires a different approach to the way you learn things. So part of this is starting to help you understand the tools that you're going to need in order to create that retention. And the benefit of doing it with bamboo is the bulk of the bamboo stuff we're going to teach you is pretty straightforward and not technically hard. It's just a bunch of single column ties. If you start freaking out about it, all it is single and double column ties.
Spoiler, basically all of bondage is just a bunch of single column ties.
Really complicated single and double column ties. So, what we're going to show you is different ways that you can both attach someone to bamboo and how you can, well, they're all how you can attach, but how you can attach using cuffs or how you can attach using lashing, and then how you can potentially interact and play with these things. First things to consider are directionality of the person's limb in deference to...
Do we want to talk about bamboo itself?
Yeah, let's talk about bamboo.
So bamboo, it's fucking firm, right? It's really solid. And
it's a grass, just like the grass.
It is a grass. It's a grass, but it's a branching grass. So you'll notice that there are these ridges in your bamboo that you have in front of you. We tend to refer to these as nodes, right? They're just little bumps. These, when you see it in the wild, this is where the little sprouts and branches will come out from the bamboo, right? We have sanded them down, so they should be fairly smooth. These are handy though when you are tying because they do add a little bit of friction. So as we start to apply the rope, we're going to keep in mind where those nodes are and be on either side of them. Don't tie on it because it's a little thicker and the rope would slide off, right? It's going to go to where it's thinner. So keeping those in mind. Also, sometimes they might be a little bit sharp, so you want to stay away, like either side. Also, the bamboo, very firm. Being mindful, placing it against the body, putting it on the shin, on the bone, that's going to be more painful.
I shake my head. My head is like a, no, don't ever do this.
Ow, ow, ow.
My head shake is like, hey, if you want to hurt somebody's shin.
Yeah, right? Like, again, choosing the option that you want. So putting it against the back of the calf is much meatier portion of the body, right? That's going to be a little bit more comfortable. However, notice when I point my foot, I have more give. Once I flex my foot, that muscle firms up, and that becomes a little bit more of like a pressure point. So as we start to tie, this is going to come into play depending on how tight that cuff is around the bamboo and the body part. Whether the muscle is flexed or not is going to be a very different thing. If we tie and Andrew clamps down on my leg while my foot is pointed,
and then I adjust Melissa's leg,
flexes my foot, suddenly that becomes even tighter. And these are things to keep in mind, right? Like for the person in the rope, do I want to cheat so he can't make it tighter by flexing my foot as he's tying? Or do I want to give him the play of my foot is pointed, now he can make it tighter by flexing
and this can create a lovely swing dynamic where I force Melissa's foot to point, and then I start tying, and then she tries to flex it, and then I have to force her to point it. Like,
so these are things to keep in mind.
the big thing that I would say to not ever do is you do not want to put bamboo on the other side of a joint. You can move bamboo to here,
right? So
but if it is in the crook of the leg,
you can actually separate someone's kneecap. Do not do this, especially with those holes, you can seriously injure someone by putting bamboo into a joint.
This is
Do not do this.
the way disreputable militaries torture people. By
So,
disreputable, I mean.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, joint in general, joints and bondage, including bamboo, are a no-go. Do not add things there, right? Similarly, like, just one more note about bamboo. Actually, we can wait till we
Sure.
get to manipulating bondage.
Question?
Yeah.
If we see someone doing that regularly, can we say something or should we say something?
You can potentially, when they're done with their scene, ask, I noticed you doing this thing. Are you aware of the potential risks to joints by applying bamboo in that way? They may not. They may not know that that's a risky behavior.
Or they may say, actually, it looks like it's all the way up
Right.
inside the leg, but the thing that I'm doing is this,
Right.
or I'm doing this to mitigate that happening.
Yeah.
Like, if they're aware of that thing and have thought through it, and the person who's tying knows that that's a potential outcome that they're creating, and they're still into it anyway, cool. If you want to pay for hospital bills, that's your business, friend.
Like, leading in general, when noticing something and having concerns about it, I try to lead with a question. Like, hey, I saw you do this. Can you tell me more about what you were doing there? What your goal was? Or, yeah, I have heard that is risky. Are you aware of those risks? Things like that.
I am not the rope bondage police.
No.
I'm not interested in being the rope bondage police. I generally don't like police broadly. Like, people's risk factors are going to be wildly different than mine, and that's okay. I may have concerns of where their risk factors interact with their ignorance. Like if they don't understand the risk of the thing that they're doing, I will ask them questions to determine that and say like, hey, have you thought about these things? Once I've said, have you thought about those things? If they're like, eat shit, I'm going to do what I want to do, then I'm like, cool, all right. I've done my due diligence. You're the boss of Useville, all right? Any other questions? All right, so let's talk about how to attach people to this thing. The first thing that we're going to talk about is a running cuff.
The great thing about this particular technique is that it doesn't have to only be when you're working with bamboo. It can work everywhere.
Yeah, so let's start with a leg. And you want to start with a single column tie. I can start with a single column tie on the bamboo, or I can start with a single column tie on the person. If you want to watch this, I would suggest you scooch closer. One thing that I don't think people do often when they're in classes like this, where they have to learn live, is scooch close enough to see the thing that is happening.
I'm gonna get you on a rotate like 2 millimeters this way. Thank you.
Scooching is important. Create my single column tie. Respect the directionality of my rope. I move to this bit of bamboo. Much like my single column tie. Once around, twice around. The great thing is I don't have to care about how tight it is on the bamboo.
Yeah, the bamboo.
Because the bamboo is not going to suffer any damage.
Bamboo doesn't care, right? You can tie as tight as you want to the bamboo itself.
And then I'm going to pass over through this cuff,
I'm gonna drop this down a tiny bit
Yeah.
so they can see better.
right?
So basically, he made a couple passes and then went through that cup, this cup.
Underneath.
Yeah.
And then I can continue to make cuffs with this rope, right? So if I want to go up higher on the leg,
So you will hear that referred to as an inline cuff because it's in the line of the running end.
Running cuff?
A running cuff because it's the running ends. Some people will also sometimes refer to this style of cuff as a hojo cuff, meaning it came from hojo jitsu because it's how often sort of martial officers would capture arms with this kind of cuff, like just one side, one cuff, the other side, the other cuff, and pull someone's arms back behind them. So it will come up in historic images of people in rope from Japan. Right. So you can continue. The nice thing about this is that you can basically continue creating these cuffs as long as you have rope. Weirdly, if you've made this whole structure bigger, that's the bottom wrap of your TK,
yeah.
right? Like, this should look familiar. It's just on, right now, it's on a micro scale. But that's what I was saying, like, everything we do is these running cuffs, basically.
One time. And then if I wanted to keep Melissa's leg straight, so she can move, I could go up to the thigh
Mm-hmm.
and do it again.
So now, because this is a straight line, this pole, if he came here and did another cuff, right? And the great thing is you could even do the cuff directly around everything.
Well, we're
Yeah.
gonna get to that
Okay.
bit. You're now jumping,
Jumping ahead, sorry.
You're now jumping
Yeah.
ahead.
Right?
So
Put another
option
cuff here.
number
blah,
one
blah.
is cuff to cuff, right? So cuff, 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 as many cuffs as you want, right? Option number two is the thing that Melissa was trying to cheat ahead to, which is ostensibly a two-column tie. You can create a two-column tie that has both things in it. One of the ways that I am going to propose an addition to the two-column tie to make it quicker and easier for you is a thing that was taught to me as being called a Shikushima loop, named after a Japanese rope artist named Shikushima. So, tie a single column, once around, twice around. Instead of passing a single rope through everything, I'm going to double the rope into a bite. Take that bite through, right? Create a half hitch, and I've got myself an adorable little bow. Can do that again.
Continue. The nice thing about this is you're not fussing with like two cuffs, and you're not even having to pass the rope through between these, right? Like, you, again, in the same way that we didn't want you to have to shove your finger in between the person's calf and thigh in the Futomomo Shibari. We don't want you to have to shove your finger between the pole and the leg or whatever you're tying. So you can sort of pass it under and behind and around and just feed a little bit of a bite under and capture it that way.
Loop goes through. Loop goes through.
Right? So when you're creating that secondary loop, you want to make sure that you're twisting it in toward itself. So just backing out here for a second. This loop of the running end needs to twist in on itself. Notice how it's crossing. And then I drop it over. If I don't make that cross, it's just going to be a loop and it's not actually going to lock. So it needs to cross in and then drop over in order to tighten down.
The great thing about using this type of Shikushima loop is that then these become leverage points that I can grab and manipulate with. Right?
Question.
Question here and then question.
Is this different than a yuki knot or a yuki fix, or is it the same different nomenclature?
A yuki knot is something that has been described as something different to me.
Okay.
So I don't know what a yuki fix is.
Okay.
Question? Or thing?
I'm losing my.
That's fine.
That's right.
Question.
When you're adding that, like I noticed it on the second wrap that you did, you made sure to go between the rope and the bamboo
Mhm.
before you tied the bow. Like, does it have to go in between those two, or does it not matter?
So the question was, they noticed that for the second one that Andrew constructed, he went between the cuff and the bamboo. Is that necessary?
Oh,
Yeah.
not the cuff and the bamboo. Like when he came back around, like he made sure to like pull the rope this way, and so the rope.
You're talking about doing this.
No, it was like, I saw the same thing, it's like through
Yeah,
the
between
bamboo
the-
and the
yeah.
line
Through
and the
here.
stem, basically,
Yeah.
instead of on the other side of the stem, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, you didn't capture the stem line in it, you went around it instead and knotted on top of it.
Yeah, that was
Like through here?
Yeah.
Is that necessary? Yeah. So what we want to do is make sure that this cuff, or the lock off is gonna be between the two.
You want it on either side,
Yeah.
either side of the stem and the rope, because that's what serves, almost in the same way
It's
that
the
the Kaneki
friction.
does, to cinch it off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what's gonna tighten it down and make a friction. If you come from here and here, then it's gonna tighten on the foot
Yeah.
or whatever is in that cup, right? We want it between the two, so it's tightening against itself, not into the flesh.
Can I actually point to what I?
Yeah.
So, right here, I noticed that like it came in between this and this. Does that matter? Oh, never mind.
Yeah, it just, no, it folded over.
Oh.
I folded over to go directionally. That's the thing you're saying.
Yes.
Would you
Okay.
try it one more time, please?
Sure.
Just do that one, the part y'all are talking about.
So what we are emphasizing is the fact that once you make the cuff around whatever you're tying together, you want to come between the two items
To create a cinch,
to create a cinch and then lock down
Half hitch.
there. Right?
lock down. Right?
So that you're adding the tension to the ropes
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
between, not to the cuff or the, like, not to the body part.
And then this can go in either direction. It
Yeah.
doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Like I can go this way, I can go this way,
Yeah.
I can go this way.
This is a
Like
multi-directional friction. It doesn't matter where you go from there.
I can do this.
Does that answer your question? Cool. Any other questions?
What did you call it again?
A Shikushima loop. Yeah.
I have not a question, but a quick comment.
Sure.
Which is, to the point that in Ojikin and Good most times have made already, using bamboo is functioning as a lever.
We're getting there.
Okay, cool.
Right?
And I'm understanding the purpose is so that there's basically a barrier between the bamboo and the body.
When we are going between, it's serving as a cinch.
Is your
Right.
question, why would you use this and not the first thing I typed?
Yeah, well, or either both, basically, I'm just noticing.
So the
that
first
there's
one,
a-
the
there's
first
a
one
section
creates a
between-
distance.
Yeah.
There's
Right.
inherently a distance.
Right,
This limits that distance.
right.
There are reasons that you would want one and not the other.
Right.
So, one example would be, if I were tying Melissa in what would be similar to a crucifix, right? If Melissa had the bamboo over her shoulders like this,
Right.
and I tied a bunch of Shikishima loops, the bamboo would then support the pose, right? So Melissa can then relax her arms, and the rope will hold her, and the bamboo will stay static. If I do the opposite and I put the bamboo underneath, and I do a series of running cuffs, Melissa's now supporting the bamboo. She cannot bring her arms down, but she also has to exert physical force to hold it up. So it becomes essentially the same torture where you give somebody two books and have them hold their hands. So you might want to use either of these things. Like Melissa's arms are already starting to shake a little bit. just from
Similarly,
this.
you could do it above, right?
Yeah.
Above, but if it's a loop, I'm not actually really supported there. It's a lot harder
Yeah.
than if it's tight and I can kind of lean on it.
So there are different reasons you might want to use these different solutions to create different sensations when you're working with someone.
Right.
And so one is inherently closer to the body. You can use them to sort of solve kind of different problems.
Yeah. So the other reason why you might want to use bamboo, since we're here and we're talking about positionality,
Yeah.
is to, we kind of talked about keeping my legs straight. Here, I would have to keep my arms straight. This can be used to then twist and turn and
So I could
position
then-
someone.
Could then tie Melissa's leg like this,
Right.
or up like this,
Right.
right?
Reinforces things. The point that Ordinals was getting to is the fact that once you are using a tool like bamboo to manipulate someone's body, you're using it as a fulcrum. This is a mechanical advantage for you as the person tying. It will make things easier for you. It can also make it easier for you to overextend the person that you are manipulating. So move slowly, wait for feedback, be very careful.
Yeah, so like if I just, it is a million times easier for me to move Melissa into a position that will potentially harm her because the force needed to be generated at the end of this is way less to maneuver her than if I was much closer to where that that on you. So be careful with those things, right?
Go very slowly.
So those are two cuff solutions. So one is sort of a double column using a Shibari loop. The other is running cuffs, which you can use sort of for anything. These aren't just bamboo solutions. The second option for attaching somebody to bamboo is what I would use if I wanted somebody perpendicular to the bamboo. So we've done parallel. Let's talk about perpendicular. And for perpendicular, I tend to use lashing. If somebody's been in the Scouts, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts of America, you probably know a little bit about lashing. So typically for lashing.
And this is especially where these nodes can come in handy.
Yeah.
And you want to be mindful of where they are.
You're going to want to tie a single column. And then you can sort of do lashing two different ways. You can do lashing in kind of a vertical horizontal or in a diagonal. So I'll do vertical horizontal first. I'm going to pass under the rope.
So this is going to look familiar to your half moon, right? Sort of similar idea in that you're coming over horizontally and passing behind vertically, or whichever that configuration is. But like this shape should look similar, right? You're kind of constructing a square. And being mindful, as you tie against bamboo, that each pass you make is going to make it tighter. So as he's doing this, I'm feeling the pressure build. And notice my foot is kind of pointed. So at this point, if he wanted to make it even tighter, he could flex my foot. Be mindful, if you're this close to the foot, you're at the Achilles tendon, so be very careful.
How do I lock this off? Fortunately, we've already discussed the solution. I can use a Shibari loop,
Pass around
pass around both.
so that it's on either side and create a loop, right? So for the folks at home, they can't really see. But we wind up with a loop here at the ankle.
Right? So the other side would be
Could do a diagonal,
a diagonal lashing.
meaning we're
Same
gonna
idea, but I'm going to
cross up and over at diagonals.
diagonal.
The great thing is that, as Andrew alluded to, these are things that people in like scouts or like sort of orienteering, I think, just like camping stuff in general, there are instructionals on how to do lashings like this, of like, this is how you create a bamboo structure out in the woods or whatever. So you can find videos on YouTube of how to do lashings. Things to keep in mind for our purposes is that every time you cross over this diagonal, you're adding pressure to this pressure point. So especially on someone's shin, this is going to build pressure into a bony, delicate area. Do it on purpose.
Which is
right? That can be shitty. If you want to not add pressure to it, what he just like backed out a little bit to alleviate that, and he's doing the crosses slightly staggered, so they're not piled directly on top of each other. It's like one is over here, one is over here, so they're not compounding.
But
So again, if you want to be a sadist and cause pain and pressure, stack them. Do it. Go for it.
the other
If you
thing that
want
you
to
can
not
use to increase that pressure
do one of
is
these.
how tight you use this friction, the
Right.
Shibari loop. If you pull it really tight, it's going to add more pressure.
Right.
Again, for Melissa, I can now flex this foot, and it tightens the rope against Melissa's shin.
Because
And
it's a-
specifically, if I've tied it into that pressure point,
Yeah.
it's going to dig only into one point of Melissa's shin,
Right.
which can be super unpleasant and also fun.
Other things you might consider if you want to encourage pain and whatnot is like putting something against the bone first and then tying over top of it.
Bottle cap works.
A four-sided die, what else? Jacks.
Jacks,
If anyone's played
yeah.
jacks, they suck. These are things you can do for fun if the person's excited about it.
If that's what you consider fun.
Yeah, if that's your jam, those are ideas. So yeah, once the person's in the tie,
Mm-hmm.
you can use the bamboo to move them around, right? Look at that, I have all this exposed.
Can I
Voila.
take a picture of the back of that?
Sure.
Okay.
Yes.
Of like the bottom, the top and the bottom.
Share that with the.
I can, yeah.
Yeah, post it on Slack when you're done.
And then like the bottom bit.
So, you've got 4 different solutions of how to attach somebody to bamboo. You've got a little under 20 minutes, about 15 minutes to screw around with it. Take this time to make sure that you understand all of those 4 different options and ask questions if you have them. Heather.
So this Shikushima,
Mhm.
how like stable is that? Like, could you suspend that bamboo?
Yep.
Yes,
With that loop?
yes.
I could.
You might do another pass, like drop another one over top just to be extra sure, but yeah, you can. Because it's not, one, this is doubled over, 2, it's tightening against itself and it's locked off over here, right?
It's like you're going.
Yeah. Spoiler, you asked a question. Here we go.
Move too fast.
Sorry. This is gonna suck. Ow.
But like, it's gonna be unpleasant, but yes.
Ideally, you would do both, right? So ideally, there would be a second one,
Yeah.
and it would just.
But
go.
my response to most people of like, is this suspendable? It's like, well, unless the rope's gonna break anything is suspendable. Is it survivable for a person that's in it?
Survivable, that's the
Can
metric.
you walk away from it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, well, yeah.
Well, I mean, you would be surprised. There are some people that no matter what you put them into, tie them, will sustain and survive that.
Yeah. Yeah. Try some things. Go do it.
All right, folks. Your time is now up. We have another class today officially. So please untie, return all of your bamboo, leave the mats where they are, and please, as much as you can, exit and do your catching up outside of the building because we need to be reset for the room. For people at home, if you know Hojo cuffs and you know what you know about the 2-rope tie, you can do this. This is just a double column. Hojo cuff, 2 wraps around. Hojo cuff, tie off. See if you can figure that out at home. We'll talk to you next month. Bye-bye.